Cara, thanks so much for joining us today. I'd love to learn more about your own employee experience in education, some of your background, what you're doing now. But before we get to that, do you mind just talking a little bit about yourself, personally, professionally, whatever you want to share? And then why did you choose to become an educator?
Yeah, for sure. So I started teaching now 20 years ago, which sounds absolutely insane. But I loved being around kids. I had been a nanny. I had worked at a fitness center as a daycare attendant. Like I'd been around kids my whole life. Like that was just something I was very passionate about. And so I went into be a teacher. It's actually funny. I was going to be in elementary ed, but I went to observe a fifth grade classroom and he had me teach math. And I said, okay, I'm going to change it to early childhood. And that's when I learned like early childhood was really for me. And so I loved like helping kids love school. So I really loved like that kindergarten, first grade, like that was my sweet spot. And that was like really like my passion. And I'm still very passionate about early childhood. That's something that I don't think will ever leave me. I'm very passionate about kids just loving school and creating that love of learning in students. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've done everything. I was an instructional coach. I was an administrator. I was a teacher leader for our district. So I represented back when it was elevating and celebrating teachers and teaching from the Bill and Melinda Gates Education Foundation. I was heavily involved in switching our district from a top down, like district led to teacher led. So everything kind of came from our teacher perspective. And so like our teachers led our professional learning, our teachers led district trainings. So it was very, very teacher driven, which was what led me to have my specialist degree in teacher leadership. And I even planned state conferences with ESET and national, was involved in our national event as well, just because I was very, very passionate about teacher leaders. Like I really believe that, teachers have that ability to positively affect our students and each other. So that like was a very big piece of who I was in my career.
Yeah, that's great. Now, I know you have a bit of a unique journey getting to where you are right now. And part of that is going to be in this conversation, kind of reliving some of the things that have happened to you, right? So I think it's important to share that this is your unique experience. It's not the experience of everybody. I know you have some stories to tell around some of the reasons why you left education. And none of this is meant to be, putting down of a team, of an administrator, of a school or a district. So I wanted to get that out here. This is your individual story. Everybody will experience something different. And you mentioned too, you have a wide range of experiences of what you've done, going from teacher to teacher leader, now into the professional world outside of education. Most of your career was spent in K-2. Can you talk about what it was like for you as a teacher? So as you think back and you think about all the kids you impacted, think about, again, this idea of I chose to leave. What was your experience like as a teacher?
As a teacher, I absolutely loved it. Like I embraced it from day one. I became a teacher leader very early. I think my third year of my career, I was already leading professional learning for teachers. I was very much part of that engagement, like engaging the students before like engagement was really that buzzword. It was just really something I believed in. I believed in my students, like, hands-on and collaborating and all those Kagan techniques. Like I was very big on trying to get my students up and moving and not sitting and really like having that like exciting experience about school. I didn't want them to like dread coming there. I wanted them to really love being there. And so as a teacher, I remember when the rubric changed. I think it was when the standards changed and the rubrics changed at the same time. And we were all learning how to unpack standards. And that was like a really big thing. I had an administrator observe me. And it was the first time I'd ever gotten anything other than like above average. She said, my students were coming up to the smart board one at a time. And she said, all your students weren't engaged. And I was like, what does she mean? Like they can't all run up to the smart board at the same time. What does that look like to engage your students? Like all of your students being engaged. And so I really had to like take a step back and say, okay, if I'm not engaging my students, what does that look like? Okay, it looks like everybody has a whiteboard and they're answering they're answering on the whiteboard while somebody comes up to the board so that they're not sitting there and just watching, that there's time where they're actively involved in that process. So, I was big in that movement, that change of, engagement and rigor. I also worked in a school that was almost a state takeover school. So we had the state in and out of our classrooms. And one of the things I had asked my administrator, I said, does my classroom look right? When the state came in, does it look right? Were they happy? Because I was always big on having my students stand up and say the objectives and like really involved. And she said, I don't even want to tell you. Like, I just don't want to tell you. And I said, tell me what happened. And she said, the state wasn't happy because you didn't have your procedures posted. But I said, but we went over the procedures. Like, we went over them verbally. And she was like, yeah, she's like, don't worry about it. Don't put up your, like, I know what you're doing. Your procedures are evident. Your kids know their procedures. Don't worry about it. But that was something like, that affected me. I was like, hi,
Sure.
I know I'm doing these things. So I really took everything to heart. Like, I wanted everything to be right for the kids. Like, that was just something that was a big part of who I was.
Mhm.
And even when one of my best friends, I met her, and I said, what does your rubric look like here? Like, what are the things that like they really see as valuable in the classroom? And she was like, I don't know. I just do this thing. And I said, well, like, I really believe in students knowing the standards and unpacking the standards themselves, even at the kindergarten level, and really setting goals. That was before like anybody really had their students like set goals and have
Mm.
like those data binders. And so she was like, well, I'll give it a try for a year. And she had the highest growth and the highest achievement that year. She was like, that's where like I made her believer, and now she's a reading coach. So, it was just like that infectious, like making everybody want to love the profession and,
Yeah.
do it for the students. Like, really having that impact on education as a whole was a big part of who I was as a teacher.
Yeah. And I know you made a tremendous amount of impact with those kids. And it's not just the kids, it's the colleagues that were learning from you and with you. So what I heard you just say is a lot of glowing things about your experience in education. Yet here you are outside of education. What happened maybe after those first few years? Did you change schools? Was it different leadership? What kind of started that transition for you?
Yeah, so I believed that in order to make an impact on a broader scale, that your path was to get a master's in leadership. I even served as a dean, and I absolutely hated the job as a dean. I was like, this
Oh
is like
no.
sucking my soul. Like, I really felt like it was killing me from the inside out. Like, I don't believe in punishment. I believe in like redirection. And so it was a whole like trying to change a landscape that I wasn't quite ready for. And so I just believe that those were stepping stones. Like, right, you go out of the classroom, you're an instructional coach, you're a dean, and then you're an assistant principal. Like, that's what you do to make your impact on a broader scale. And so I finally got that role as an assistant principal, and I moved my entire family 2 hours away for a role as an assistant principal. And what I learned is that and I knew working as a teacher that not all leaders are the same. Like, there were leaders that I absolutely loved working under, and then there were leaders that I did not, agree with. Our pedagogies were very different. So when I became an assistant principal, I was working under an administrator that not only like did not share my belief system and how I wanted things to be with our staff or with our students, but was misappropriating funds. Like, there was just some
Mm.
really things happening that I learned later that human resources kind of put me there to start to figure these things out.
Okay.
And so it was a very hard transition for me as a new administrator. And so I was doing my thing. I was doing what I love to do, which was having that impact on teachers. And I was giving my back to school address to my staff to really like pump them up for the beginning of the school year, even though all these things were kind of happening to me behind the scenes. They didn't, I tried to shelter them from that as much as I could
Sure.
as the leader. And when I was doing that, someone was there from NWEA getting ready to do our product training for the assessment, for the MAP growth assessment. And she came up to me and she goes, that was absolutely phenomenal. However, have you ever thought about doing what I do? And at that time, I was like, no, I don't even know what you do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know that there was a world outside of, the traditional school system. I really hadn't thought about like, where does our curriculum come from? Or these products that I love, like, who's behind them? I didn't even think about the fact that educators are in those roles. So it wasn't until like sometime later that the roles really started affecting my mental health. And I had to decide, this is just not right for me to be in this role.
Mm-hmm.
They had offered to switch me to a different school while everything else was under investigation. And at the time, like, I would have had to move my kids again anyway. And I just thought, you know what, I just need to take a step back. I need to take a step back and really reflect and figure out what I'm going to do. And it just really, it was a time of great reflection. Like, you think, like, I don't think people really understand, like, sometimes when you're transitioning, everything, my whole identity was wrapped up in being a teacher. I'm still very passionate about students, but I loved being a teacher. I loved being helping teachers. I love that instructional coaching role. And I really saw that as an administrator. And so when I left, 7 teachers left with me. So the day that I left, it was very emotional. And so I'm still very close with some of them. Like some of them still message me and we keep in touch, but it was just a very hard transition. And so I took a step back and took that time to really think about what am I going to do? And I thought, I remember this lady, she said something to me about her role. What did she do? And trying to figure that out, like consultant, professional learning, like all these words, like for professional development, and what that role looked like, I had never really considered. So that was something that opened my eyes. I took some time to really think about what am I good at? Well, I'm good at talking in front of people. I'm good at doing professional learning. So what does this look like for a role? And so that's where it led me to a role in professional learning first.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing how one leader can impact so many people, right? So it's you and 7 other people that left at the same time. I doubt you created some coup where you were talking with groups of teachers like, hey, let's all get out of here at the same time, right? So instead, what those teachers saw was I'm going to an environment that's not a positive for me, right? I'm not getting fulfilled. I'm still working with kids, but there's all these other stressors and anxieties that are placed upon me. So I know you talked about, there was some legal stuff that was happening. Can you talk about the environment itself? What was that environment like as a teacher? And at what point did you, and maybe this was early on, I'm not sure, but at one point did you realize, okay, something is off here? What was kind of that process for you?
Yeah. So before that, I had worked with an administrator that she and I just had such a great connection, so when you have that person that you really have a good connection with, and I was like an assistant principal, but our school was too small, so it was more of a stipend role of like an administrative assistant. But serving with her for those years, and really we pulled the school grade up, like everything was very positive. So really turning that around and then going to this experience where I wasn't working with someone that saw things the same way, it was very hard. Like she even came, like my old administrator even came to visit me at that school. So you feel like teachers didn't have the right amount of equipment. They didn't have, like some teachers didn't have books. So in that environment, it was like, how can kids learn, right? If we don't have these basic things and the teachers don't have their basic needs met, then how can we set them up for success? And so like that was a very hard thing for me because I was trying to fight against those systems and really try and get my teachers what they needed. And so they'd come to me and tell me all these things, and then I'd be told like, oh, there's nothing you can do about it, or this is how it is.
By
So it
your
was just kind of
administrator.
by my administrator.
Yeah.
So it was very much like an oppressive system for me, and teachers felt that as well, like they just couldn't do what they needed to do. And so that's where I was just like, I don't enjoy coming to work. I feel very stressed. My administrator would give me these directives every day. And so like one of my directives was I was not allowed to talk to the school resource officer. So he was trying to fill me in on like what our safety protocols were, or like how we were going to run certain things. And I was not allowed to speak to him. Like it was just strange directives that kept like coming down. And each day I kind of came to school with another directive. Like now and I think like one of my things was now you're going to be in the cafeteria all day. Like that's all you can do. You can't walk around classrooms. You can't, like, I guess because the fear of change and what I was going to do was great. And so like as things happened, like more directives got put down, and I was like, okay, I can't like live in the cafeteria all day. Like I love seeing the students, but like this is not going to work for me.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Was it similar? Was it similar for teachers then? Were there certain like restrictions like that for teachers as well?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have it as bad as I had it, I think, but like they were just like lacking resources, and they'd come to me and they knew that I couldn't do anything to change it. Like I wasn't telling them what was happening, obviously behind the scenes. Like they didn't know how bad it was, but it was hard. Like when you have that relationship where you really can't talk to your administrator, or your hands are tied, like they see that, like I didn't have to say anything. Like it was just obvious. And like, even like talking at school functions or anything like that. I wasn't allowed to do any of those type of things. So like it just looked very muffled. And so, but they knew like what ideas I'd come with because I'd shared them at like our back to school address and like things that before those things started happening. So it was just as time went on, and they were like, I like these ideas, or I want to do these things, or I see that she's trying to help me and she can't. So it
Yeah.
just kind of was just like a natural, like they were seeing the struggle too. And I think that that affects culture, right?
Yeah.
So there was this huge effect on culture because of how this was kind of happening.
Yeah. What's funny, at the very beginning, you mentioned as a teacher, you want to create an environment where your kids don't dread coming to school.
Hmm.
And I can imagine you're at a point now where you were dreading coming to
Yeah.
school, the exact antithesis of what you were trying to do as an educator, but as an
Yeah.
administrator, should be able to really set that foundation, leverage things that make the culture better. But there was a lack of autonomy, a lack of empowerment for you to be
Hmm.
able to do the things that you're passionate and excel at.
Yeah, I definitely dreaded coming to school. Like, my son saw me crying after school one day, like at home, and that was it for me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like I just that was like he was like, "What can I do to help you?" Like, and I just couldn't hide it from him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of I need to step away from the situation. It got pretty intense and pretty emotional. And I
Yeah.
think for your first experience as an administrator, like as you're trying, like very, very excited about and very passionate about students and changing education on a broader scale. And like,
Yeah.
what things work because you've done it in the classroom and you've done it as an instructional coach. And at that point, I'd helped turn around two schools. One was almost an F and changed to a B in 1 year, and the other one about the same. So like I'd already had these like huge impacts and these huge wins to be in this situation where I just felt powerless. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
just a very emotional time. Like it was just very disheartening. And I think like for me, I know like it created a bit of a mental crisis because I this is what I wanted to do. This was everything that I
Yeah.
believed that I should do in education. Never in a million years did I think like I'd ever step out and have this like other world. Like I'm very thankful and happy now because everything
Yeah.
worked out really well. But at the time, like it was just what do I do now? Like, I don't know what to do. Like, it was very much, I don't know what to be when I grow up, like, and I'd worked this hard. Like at this point, I'd invested this much for my education and really put everything into it. And so stepping out was like a very big decision that wasn't made lightly.
So how much in your mind were you battling, I still want to be administrator? Or was it more, this experience was so bad that I have to find something else?
Yeah, it was that. It was so bad. And I
Yeah.
had the teachers that ended up leaving with me, they were like, "You are so good at this. Like this is
Yeah.
what you're called to do. Like we love you." Like they even a couple went to the school that they were offering to transfer me to, and like they were calling me and saying like, "No, you have to come to this school. Like you have to." And I said, I don't think I can. I just remember just being like, I can't. Like I
Mm-hmm.
love you and I know you're going to do amazing things, but I can't go there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say like in everything, it just broke me. Like I was just really in a place of brokenness. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it was just a really hard thing to recover for. It was just like, I'm not meant to be an administrator. And I just like backed away, whereas I don't think it was necessarily that now that I like reflect and look back,
Sure.
like I think that I probably would have made an amazing administrator,
I agree.
but that experience was just so rough that it was really hard to recover from.
Yeah, and you mentioned something about you've lost your identity, right? Because you've been an educator for so long, and then you get to the point where you're going to school and you feel broken inside, and you're going home and you're crying, and you're seeing,
Hmm.
your family witness you crying. So there's this, so a concept called IR theory, which is what's my identity versus what's my role. And a lot of times teachers, and we had a guest recently that talked about, she was a special education teacher, very similar sentiment where she was going to school and hers was more of, high expectations. I can't put in enough hours. No matter what I do, I can't get ahead. But she had this IR kind of break as well, where she went home crying, every day for a year and a half and said, finally, I have to do something else for this. So there's your identity, which is who am I as a person? And then there's your role, which is I'm a teacher, I'm a parent, I'm a insert whatever here. I can imagine and I used to be a teacher myself. You go to school for teaching, you spend several years teaching. That kind of becomes your role, becomes your identity, because I
Mm-hmm.
am a teacher instead of today I'm a teacher, but on the weekends I'm something else. So
Mm-hmm.
how did this identity versus role kind of come into play as you made your transition? Because you wanted to stay in education, you wanted to
Mm-hmm.
help impact students and teachers. How did this role of teaching help you transition into something else?
Yeah, and I think that that's a good point too, because as a teacher, most of the time, like your identity still is a teacher on the weekends because you have so many tasks that are still weekend related tasks, which I think has been like almost like a recovering teacher trying to figure out what does that mean to not have to work or worry about work on the weekends. But for me, it was really hard. Like I knew I wanted to stay in education. Some transitioning teachers, they'll go into IT or they'll go into something else with those transferable skills. But for me, I knew that I needed to still be in education. So it led me, like I said, I was looking for something that I knew I was good at. And I knew I was good at professional learning. I knew I was good at training and teaching, and that was something that I could be successful at. So I looked for things that were in line with those roles. And what you find is like a lot of contract work, which I was totally outside of. Like I was always used to having a salary since I stepped out of college. And so now I'm a contractor and I only get paid when I work. And so, I still have my family that's relying upon me. And so that was hard in itself. But for me, I really wanted to be involved in training teachers. And so I picked up a role at Learn Zillion where I was curriculum training and going to districts and schools and really training not only teachers, but district staff and school staff on like the programs and how it was going to benefit students and teachers. And like I remember my most favorite professional learning experience there was really teaching on how to use assessments and like which assessments to look at and why, how to engage students in the assessment process, how do students goal set relating to those lessons. And that was fun to me. Like I get really excited about those kind of things. And so once I'd done professional learning, NWEA had an opening for a virtual trainer, similar training on their product. And so I stepped into that. And then they had a full-time role where it was a trainer of trainers. So where I was actually training the people that was doing the professional learning. So like one thing leads to another, leads to
Mm-hmm.
another. And so our product that I was responsible for was something that was totally new to NWA. It was on assessment literacy, informative assessment. So I ended up accidentally training the sales team, which led me to my position at BrainPOP. So like one thing kind of snowballed into the other, but I really wanted to stay in that space of teaching, learning, growing, doing. And that's where at BrainPOP, I feel like I still have that impact. I still have that connection to education. I'm still helping when I help the sales team understand our products. I'm really helping them to go out and talk to district leaders and talk to school leaders and feel really good about representing our product and how our product can change students' lives for the better. So that's really like, it's still very rooted in who I am and in, the trainings that I do now.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the pre-podcast questionnaire, you mentioned a couple of things. I'll kind of just read some of the words that you put. So you mentioned it's important to hold on to your why when things get hard or when you've made the decision that you want to transition from the classroom. But you also say working from home comes with its own set of challenges, right? It's easy to
Yeah.
get caught up locked away in my home office. I
Mm-hmm.
love your LinkedIn posts where you share, here's my family and me working all at the same time, or
Yeah.
here's what it's actually like, right? So there is
Yeah.
the reality of it, and then there is I don't want to say the grass is always greener, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you're in situations like you're in where you dread going to work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like one of our previous guests who dreaded going to school every day.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is sometimes
Yeah.
it's like entrepreneurship, right? You read
Mm-hmm.
lots of stories about people that start their own business. Well, what you don't hear is 95% of people who end up failing at their business that end up having to work 2 or 3 jobs on the side while trying to run their own. Like there's a lot of
Right.
complexity
Mm-hmm.
that's behind the scenes. So can you talk a little bit about your outside of traditional K-12 experience and then how
Mm-hmm.
similar or dissimilar it was to your expectation?
Yeah. So it's funny because I do a lot of those posts because I get a lot of messages every week on LinkedIn. Like I get so many messages from teachers that are wanting to transition. And the one that I see the most, and I really wanted to make a post about it, and I did a couple weeks ago, was the post from a teacher that's like, I want to work at home. Like I want a remote job so that I can stay home with my kids. And I'm like, oh, it gets me every time they say that because one, when you're transitioning, you're learning an entire new role. Like you're learning something completely outside of your comfort zone. It's not something like usually a teacher goes into something like sales or marketing. There are transferable skills, but you are learning a whole lot of new skills and you're learning a product and you're learning how to position it. And it's completely different than anything you did in traditional ed. So I think there's this false expectation of like it's easy to work from home because there is absolutely no way. And I tried it during COVID where I was working and trying to also be a mom. It's very, very difficult. So I have twin 1-year olds and they have a nanny. Like the decision was a nanny or daycare because there has to be childcare. And there are some days, like you said, that, the nanny's sick or there's, something where I have to work. And I do have that flexibility where I can tell everybody, hey, I don't have childcare today. It's going to be a rough day. I'm going to be in and out. But you're home, so you're making up those hours, like when the babies go to sleep, or like there's other times that you're working. There's so many times that I find myself working from my phone. Whether it be in the school pickup line or, so there is that little bit of flexibility. I do miss being at school with my kids, like when you get to go to school with your kids, that's a great experience. But like there is no separation from home and work. I work where I am. So there's always that you can go back to it. You can finish it at another time. There's no like dead set at the end of the day, other than I try and like once my kids get home, that's where my day starts to wind down. I try and get as much done as I can earlier and I work through lunch. So like I think that there's sometimes this ideation that you're going to go like have these great lunches and you're going to have an hour to eat. And like, no, like my protein shake is at my desk, so that is, there's just not that get up. And so there are times where I literally sit at my desk for 6 hours. That's not necessarily the expectation of my company, but I have to get things done or, I want to get things done before my kids get home. So, so I just think it's not necessarily that I think sometimes they think it's less work and it's not less work. It's different. It's just how the work is, or where you're working from.
Yeah. I have 2 kids, 2 boys, 7 and 10, and we have e-learning days once a month.
Oh,
and I
bless you.
I hate to say this out loud. I dread those days for a variety of reasons. One, so I'm at my home office right now, doing the podcast. So I'll be working, trying to maintain some amount of, and my 2 boys are amazing. Like my 10-year-old, completely responsible. He would complete all of his e-learning in an hour and a half straight if he could. And he'd wake up, go up and just have red eyes, like, cause he's been staring at a screen forever. Yeah. So my wife's also an educator. So we have 2 educators, or one former, one current educator at home with our kids e-learning days. Like, oh, this should be simple. It's never simple.
It's not. No.
And almost every day can be like that if you're working from home, because there's constant changes. There's constant, and other people's schedules too. They see you as, oh, Cara, you work from home. Hey, come help me with this, whatever this is. Like, no, the reality is I'm working right now. I can't just leave and go somewhere else. So there is that common kind of misconception of what work from home is like. But at the same time, you have educators that are dreading going to school. Right. Right. And my goal is that we talk to enough educators, bring enough awareness to this idea of the employee experience, that school leaders are stopping and saying, okay, I know we put a lot of emphasis on here's the next thing for education. Why don't we take a step back and prioritize and start to figure 100%. Out what are those things that we need to be working on right now? What are the things that we should drop because there's no empirical data showing that we're making progress in student achievement and whatever the outcome is. So there's definitely a lot to work from home. I feel blessed that I have the ability to do that, but the transition was real. The struggles are certainly real.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like I still have that. I have, good days and rough days, even when, you're not going into an office but there's still you're still working. So, you're still feeling that. And it's a different kind of stress. I do feel very blessed. I love it. And I love that I'm still in education, but, like you said, it's about the leadership. Like really good teachers need to be teaching. Like I worry about my kids. Like I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and then I have twins. So like they're all going through the education system. And if all the good teachers transition, like what is going to be left for them? And that is the biggest fear of mine, like
Yep.
that all the good teachers are going to go, they're going to find new roles. And then there's just like no what, like in here in Florida, we're looking at like untrained people going to take over classrooms. So is that what our future is like? Like, what is our
Mhm.
future like if everybody leaves? So I am really involved in wanting to know like what we can do for teacher retention. How can we keep good teachers where they are? That's something that, is very much in my heart because I care about who my kids have, like
Yeah.
who they, that they have somebody that's really wanting to be there, that is that teacher that I was, that wants to engage them, that wants, that just loves being there. And it makes it really hard if your administrator does not want you to love being there or is coming across that way, whether they mean to or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk a lot about helping teachers feel heard, supported, and valued.
Mm-hmm.
I think if and when we start focusing on that, and I think it's always been about the kids. Our first episode's with Jason Cochran, who's an employee experience expert, and he's a former educational psychologist. He talked a lot about, it's always been about the kids, and that's absolutely right. But what is it that impacts the kids the most? It's the adults, it's the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So the way to reach those students is through the teachers. And if we have, and you had a teacher leave, one of your kids' teachers leave, is that right? Last year?
I did
Yeah.
in the middle of the year in
Yeah.
January.
And
Oh,
it's not an uncommon thing. And it affected
no.
your kid, affected all of the
Hmm.
kids in the classroom, and affected the entire school, because then you're trying to figure out as an administrator, how do we cover for this class? Do we find somebody who's non-licensed to bring in here?
Hmm.
Do we rotate these people? Do we have a permanent sub? If so, where do we even find those people? So
Yeah, and
the
that was my
idea,
biggest fear. Like when she left, I'm like, I emailed the principal right away because she's a good friend of mine. And I was like, what's going to happen? Is it going to be a sub? Like those are
right?
the things that you worry about because you're like, okay, he's getting ready to do testing. And as much as we want to say that testing, doesn't matter, we don't want that emphasis just to be on standardized tests. Right now, it affects his future and whether he's in remedial classes or whether or not
Mm,
he can take electives when he gets to middle school or, what his path is. And so it does matter. It matters, like all of the things matter. And so really trying to, keep those teachers there. But I didn't blame her. Like I understood, when
right.
she needed to go, but it was so hard on him and he was in tears. And then, like missing his teacher and talking about that. And so trying to navigate that for him,
Mm,
and then also being worried about his education. It was a huge struggle. And that was like, even when I go in to meet the teacher night, like that's like my number one like concern is like, are they going to stay? Are they going to hang, be here? Cause like, especially like you're like, oh, you have such and such and they're so amazing. And like, they totally transformed my child's life. And then you're like, please stay, like, so I try and send gift cards and I try and like send things to like make their day better. Any little thing that I can do as a parent to say, I appreciate you because I want them to feel appreciated. I want them to feel supported. I want them to know like I'm here to help. And if, for whatever reason, if my kid got in trouble, which thankfully they don't, but like I, 100% take the teacher's side because I've been on the side where they're like, well, my kid doesn't do anything wrong. Well, hear the teacher out and really making them feel understood, like you said, heard and
yeah,
valued, because that's so important. And so any little thing I can do as a parent from that role to make them feel supported, I try and do.
absolutely. So can you talk about your work that you're doing now at BrainPOP?
Yeah. So as I said, I kind of got transitioned into training sales, like I say on accident, because I really was working with our sales team to position formative assessment and assessment literacy through NWEA. And so BrainPOP is a company I have always
Hmm.
used and loved. And if you know Moby and our characters, and you know that like we are building essential skills through our movies, like that's something that children can relate to and they can grow from. And so when I saw the opening, I was like, I could totally do that and love that. And so applied and really got lucky. Like people ask me all the time, like, how did you get into BrainPOP? I revamped my resume 552 times.
Sure.
I don't really know how I got lucky enough to be seen and heard, but very thankful for that experience. So what I do is I train our sales team on how to position our products. So I'm actually on a marketing team, which I never saw myself in marketing or as a marketer. If you still ask me what I do, I'll say a teacher, and then people ask you, well, what do you teach? And then you're like, okay, this is where it gets complicated, like the sales team. And so that's what I do. I'm a teacher of our sales team and making sure that they understand, how our products work and that how they, best work for students, how students engage in them, and really that language alignment through our company so that everybody's talking about it the same way so that when we have those conversations with district and school leaders, we're understanding the impact that BrainPOP makes in the classroom and how to get that across. Because I think a lot of people hear BrainPOP and they think, oh, but just the movie people. There's so much more to it than that. And so there's so many ways that our movies like build literacy skills behind the scenes. And so really helping them to understand that so that when sales has those conversations, they're able to better position it. So that's what I do now. I still teach. I just teach our sales team.
Well, and you use a lot of empathy in your position right now, right? It's just like as a teacher, understanding each of your kids and where they are and how they are. It's the same thing with products. It's the same thing with I'm going out and talking to school representatives. I need to understand the problems, in the market. Here's our positioning for this. It's all empathy, just like you use all the time as a teacher.
100%. And like right now is our back to school season. And so, creating certification programs, I'm very passionate about, but, listening to leadership too, saying like, we need you to back off for just a little bit until we can get through back to school season. And then bring them back, like really hearing like what everybody needs and taking like our back to school season is just as busy as like a teacher's because like that's when things are happening in ed tech world. So like really understanding like when to push forward and when to like relax a little bit so that they have their space to breathe as well because everybody in the education world like needs that. They need that space to be able to grow and do their job without like all these mandates or things coming on them.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
the same thing.
Yeah. So let's wrap up a little bit. What is one action or strategy that you hope school leaders take from your message today?
Yeah. Positivity. Like I feel like, leaders really need to trust their teachers. Like, you go to school to be a teacher, it's a very, it's a profession where you've put a lot of time and energy and to really trust their teachers to be professionals. I think that that's so important is to give them that space and just to be positive and to know like they're going to do what's best for the kids, like really building them up to know that they have the grace and space to try things. What, they can do is really just that being positive message. Like, I think, especially with walkthroughs, it can feel like a gotcha. Like, no, I'm just here to support you. Like, how can I support you? Like really coming in with that mindset of not making them feel intimidated when you walk in the room, but like really like, I'm just here to watch you do your thing. And I know you can do your thing and it's going to be amazing, and I think like the more we build them up or provide them that support, like sometimes if it's not amazing, like what kind of support can you help to provide for them? Because, like as a coach, we did coaching cycles and really getting them into other teachers' rooms so that they could see each other because that doesn't really get to happen that often. So like, how can you provide the support to help them grow? Because I know like, if you just kind of put that hammer down, like nobody likes that. Kids don't like that. Teachers don't like that, especially after you do, you're a professional, you have a degree in this, and to feel like, the hammer is being put on you because you're not doing something the way that they want you to, really going at it a different way of like, how can we grow and learn together? Something that I didn't realize that I did when I was a coach is I always said we. Like no matter what the problem was, I was always saying we, and somebody pointed out to me and they're like, that is like monumental because you're always making them feel like we're together. You're never making them feel like you need to do. It's always we're going to do. Like, how are we going to work on this together?
Yeah.
So I think that that's really important, like really, and like not hiding anything. Like data was always something that was big that we worked on it together. So we'd have these state of the school addresses where I'd show our data and like we'd talk about it. And then we'd say like, okay, here's our gaps. How can we problem solve? So like one of our ways was our first grade teacher was really good at teaching middle school math. So I would go into her reading block. I would help facilitate that so that she could go and like take a small group of our, 7th and 8th graders and teach them those math skills that they were missing. So sometimes thinking outside of the box so that you can problem solve. And when you see it as like, this is our problem collectively as a school, and we're not going to grow unless we're all working together, I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah, interesting. And you're living proof, you and the 7 teachers that left at the same time, you're living proof that laying the hammer down, to use your words, is
Doesn't
not the
work.
right environment. That's not the employee experience that educators are looking for. They want to feel heard, supported, and valued. And you can do that as a leader by treating people as people. I love this idea of the we versus you, or we versus I. This is a collective. We are a team together. We're solving the same problem together. Let's do it as a team and start using that inclusive language. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I even did that in the classroom. That's one of I talk about, and I wrote a book on goal, or I have a section of a book in goal setting, and I talk about that we versus you, because even as a class, we have I can statements. Instead of doing I can, it's we will, because as a classroom community, we're all working together. So it was important as a classroom. It's important as a teacher. Like that collectiveness is what's going to get us through.
Yeah. Do you have any celebrations you want to share with the audience today?
So I mean, I am working on a book with Gibbs Publishing on assessment, so I'm super excited about that.
Right.
How to empower students and teachers using assessment and goal setting. Also is featured in a book written by Dr. Jason Nordegren on goal setting. That can all be found in my LinkedIn. So those are super exciting things. And then I get to be featured on this cool podcast.
Nice. And you kind of went to the next question, which is, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way? You just mentioned LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn's a great way to get a hold of me. I mean, leveraging LinkedIn, and that's usually the first place if teachers are like, how can I start to, really see other teachers and connect with other educators and really help to solve these problems? I feel like LinkedIn is the place to do that. So much different than like Facebook, where you have your friends and family. It's really that you're connecting with people on a professional level. And so I can be found at Cara Holt and then EDS. So that was where you will find me, and definitely always open to hear and connect with other educators.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
All right. Well, Cara, thanks so much for joining, sharing your story with us today, your expertise. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you.